Welcome to this week's episode of Beneath the Grandstand, episode number 7. You're here with host Ryan Fenton and Alex Lohr. Alex, what's going on, man? You're not at home today, I hear. Is that correct?
That's right. Went and visited the in-laws for the weekend. So we're out in good old farm country, and I am sipping on a IPA. Let's see, this guy's from Indeed Brewing, which is in Northeast Minneapolis. It is a Lord of the Lock hazy IPA. What about you, sir? What are you sipping on?
Very nice. Well, I'm sitting here in Austin in my guest bedroom / office, sipping on Texas's good old Lone Star. Just taking it in.
Nice.
Got a run in this morning. I felt like I could enjoy a beer today, but nothing too heavy. So
Right.
It's wedding season, wedding season for me. So
how's that going?
Well, it's we Jessica and I are going to get married. We decided we're going to get married in 2020. We just don't exactly know if we're going to get married on the date and in the location that we had originally intended. So, we've been talking each week about, the pandemic and how it's affecting different people and how affecting our guests and their worlds. And everyone's going through it a different way. And my experience currently is, trying to plan a wedding in a state, which is state of Maine, where I'm from, where their restrictions are in place through September 1st. Where no events of 50 people or more can take place. And if you do come into the state before September 1st, you are required to self-quarantine for 14 days. So it's not the easiest to make decisions. And our wedding folks, unfortunately, are saying they're not going to give us back our money if we have to not have the wedding, which really is out of our control if we have it or not at this point. So it's a lot of things going on that are very new to us and to, the vendors we're working with, to be fair to them. So it's, but at the same time, you're hoping everyone looks at this in a fair light. We're all kind of hurting here. So that's the latest, man. But how about you? I don't think I'm the only one getting hit with this thing right now.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about how, kind of everything is affected now, all companies, all industries, and unfortunately mine got hit a little bit, and I kind of joined the crowd of the masses that are looking for a new job. So definitely bummed to be in that position. It's never fun. But I have an understanding that, there's a business side to it and everybody's feeling it. And I'm optimistic that this is just the next path. This is just a vessel to get me to a new opportunity. And I think you have to remember that your identity is not tied to your profession. I've had a hard time with that over, like not tying my personal identity to the company I work for. Over the last couple of years, I've started to mature a little bit and get past that a little bit more. And just I think finding a place where you're the days go by fast, you're working hard, and you have colleagues that respect you. I think if you can find that, you're a pretty lucky person. So hopefully find that in my next gig. And but in the meantime, I'm gonna be with my little guy and maybe slug out a couple extra miles.
Yeah, man, it's tough. It's I hopefully I can say this to you because we're friends and we've given each other plenty of conversations, but like, you've kind of become one of the statistics of in the wake of all this, right? And so with so many people going through it, I think the unemployment rate was 14% across the country, and in some states upwards of 25%. It's hard. And I think, if other people listening are going through it, I think your outlook in terms of having that positive approach in terms of, hey, can this be an opportunity now? And because if you look the other way, it's just really hard. I mean, with everything going on right now, it's hard. And then if an unfortunate situation, even for Jess and I, and fortunately we still have our jobs. She has her own company that's been hit pretty hard, but it's like we're trying to be positive. Okay, if we do have to adjust, like how can we still make this great and be with the people we love and and celebrate a really special day, not weigh on what we can't do, so it's just out of your control in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So
I think it's relevant. I mean, yeah, we talk about now, okay, that's how it's affecting us personally, but we know it's affecting our entire network and our entire sport. And that's kind of why we kicked this podcast off, is to, again, what if this is the right opportunity to move, yourself forward, move the sport forward, and changes that needed to happen to push it forward. I think started to hear about some ripple effects that are going to affect our sport a ton. And I think the conversation that we're going to have today, Ryan, is something that we kind of knew about. It's insider information that happens coincidentally beneath the grandstands. It's the rumors that we heard, and it's like get in front of it, and we want to give you guys all the information that you need and help you guys understand how we came to these decisions and how it's going to affect you very soon.
Yeah, and we've talked to we've been talking to a number of coaches recently at multiple levels. I mean, college coaches we've been in a lot of communication with, and the Beth Alfred Sullivan interview we did a few weeks ago really generated a lot of buzz, especially within the coaching community, and a lot of coaches started reaching out to Beth and looking for guidance, and really what she said really resonated with that community of coaches that are all going through this really, really just crazy unknown time right now. And so within those conversations, a lot more has come up, and obviously still questions to be answered, a lot that's unknown with the fall, but a lot of questions specifically around cross country, right? And what is fall cross country going to look like, with not only not understanding if football is going to happen in other sports, but if it does happen and budgets are cut and there's restrictions in place and different states have restrictions, what does that mean for the season? What does it mean for the events that usually take place and the teams that are normally traveling to get to those events? So that even then goes a step further, because the questions about this year, but then there's questions about, and then when we get out of this, what's it going to look like? Because on the table right now is a proposal to completely change the regional qualifying system and really the qualifying system to get to the NCAA championships. And so recently this week, I think it was this week, where some minute notes were published from the NCAA track and field and cross country championship committee's meeting, where if you look at meeting notes from their committee over the last year and a half, the discussion, quote unquote discussion, of the regional format has been a topic that's surfaced. Now this week, they're meeting in April, I think it was April 17th, finally put some more concrete shape to what that is, and proposing a potential 5 regional system where currently we have 9. And what that, but it's not just narrowing down the regions, but it's also how you get to the regions. And really what they're proposing is it's not an all-comers meet, where in the past every school in D1 could go compete at the region without any qualification stipulation.
Yeah, I mean, it totally changes. I think what some people think is like the cool democratization of cross country is, there is, like, no matter who you are, you have a shot at getting to the national meet. And now that picture is looking a lot messier, especially for the mid-tier programs, and especially for some of the programs who might get stuck in a really tough region, or have a hard time traveling to places where they can compete against other teams who are solid and they might garner points off of. So our whole perception on how you qualify for meets is being challenged now, and so we're going to have to quickly adjust to the new normal.
Yeah. And so our guest today, we wanted to get someone with not only experience coaching at the NCAA level in Division I, but someone that has also had experience on these boards and on these committees. And so today's guest will be Dave Smith from Oklahoma State, 3-time NCAA cross country champions. Man, they won 3 out of 4 years, that stretch from 2009 to 2012. But he held a seat and was influential on the NCAA track and field and cross country championship committee I want to say his tenure there, or his time on the committee, probably ended a year or two ago, maybe 2 or 3 years ago now. But so he has that experience, he has that understanding, and really want to dig into this with him and understand what's happening, shed some light on this system for what's really known right now, and understand if where it's at in the process. So with that, let's bring on Coach Dave Smith. Joining us from Stillwater, Oklahoma, Dave Smith. How you doing?
Doing well, hanging out, keeping my head down and my hands clean and socially distant, which makes a lot of people around here happy. I think they wish we'd institute this social distance thing a long time ago for me personally. So yeah, it's going well.
Where are you at right now? I see some trophies in the background for those watching on video.
Yeah, I'm at my office in the athletic department at OSU, and I was going to try to do this from home, but I have two Elsas or two Annas, or an Anna and Elsa at home right now, reenacting Frozen 2 for the probably 300th time of this shutdown. So I figured I better get out of there before the icy powers were turned on me.
Yeah, we're
Nice.
all going through that in some ways. I have a couple dogs. I'm waiting to start barking at some point throughout the show when someone knocks on our door. So it'll be good. But Dave, we were talking kind of about our worlds before you joined us, and just curious, and in general, how are things for you personally, and also for your program?
It's been tough, and I'm often a kind of person who goes to the worst case scenario in my mind. And so when this started emerging in mid-March, and all of a sudden the NBA canceled the season, my mind ran to the absolute worst case scenario. And I was preparing my wife for, hey, I got to find another career. We got to sell our house. We got to sell everything we've got and downsize and try to find a way to make it through the next few years. And so starting from that point, things are really rosy right now for me. I mean, we've come a long way since then, and I think that for sure there's going to be a lot of pain felt by a lot of people, and that's the NCAA is not going to be spared, and our athletic department certainly is going to feel that. I think we're already planning for some pretty massive budget cuts, and maybe adjustments to salaries as well. Not maybe, I think that's definitely going to come. So, but from the starting point of everything's done, let's give up, to, hey, we're going to take some cuts, but we're still going to be here. I'm pretty happy about the way life is going right now.
And how are you handling that news? Just with your staff and team, I'm sure there's questions. How are you guys managing that communication in a time where things are changing day to day?
We were having weekly Zoom calls with our team, semi-optional. Sometimes most of the team was on most of the calls, and it's funny. I have two different teams, a men's team and a women's team. And the men were a little bit more interactive and willing to kind of be a little looser and just social. And the women's team, we had meetings, was much more reserved and quiet. And, to get responses, you kind of had to directly call on somebody and say, hey, what are you thinking right now, Alex, and get an answer. So, I think it's to watch the attitude and the feelings of the athletes dealing with the loss of a season, the loss of the end of the academic year, and kind of go through a mourning process really, and come to terms with it and adjust to it. And you talk about the stages of grief. And I think that was in there. And I'm still working with Sinclair Johnson and Craig Nowak and Hannah Fields, who are post-collegiate athletes. And so for me, there's been that little bit of normalcy where I can go to the track, have a workout, see people doing great things. We've done a few time trials. And I realize how much I look forward to those 1 or 2 days a week when we get together and I can see them training, and how much it improves my mood and my feeling, and just being at the track on a nice, cool evening as the sun's going down, what that does for me. And I think to my athletes who don't have that, and the ones that are in Stillwater aren't allowed to come to our facilities, the ones at home are often shut out of the facilities they might have. And I feel bad for them that, I think those few minutes of the track or a couple hours of the track every week have been really good for me personally in my own kind of dealing with this. And I think it also illuminates to me how important those things are, how much I do appreciate them and now miss them. I think, they talk about not knowing what you've got until it's gone. And I think, sometimes you get mired in your job and you think, oh, it's another day, another practice. And now I look at it entirely differently, thinking, man, I wish I had, I wish I had the busy schedule I had before.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a source of therapy right now, it sounds like. And, you're talking about the track. I mean, one of the things that we're, obviously want to talk to you about today is cross country. And this year's a big year for Oklahoma State because not only do you have a track at your facility, but you have a dedicated cross country course that you guys just poured, thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of dollars into to make state of the art and ready, millions of dollars into. And you are supposed to host the NCAA Championships this year. And is that the first time since when was there a last time?
No, I think this will be the first time we've ever hosted. And yeah, we were looking really forward to it. I think my AD and our administration really got on board with this and did exceeded all my expectations for the cross country course. What I hoped we would do to get it ready for the national championships, we've done probably by a factor of 5 to 10. I mean, it's just been amazing the things that they were willing to do to make it what we feel is the best cross country course in the world. And I think from, the course is irrigated from start to finish. It's 11 to 12 meters wide throughout the entire thing. The running surface is elevated so that it drains. We've got, kind of drainage ditches alongside and culverts going under the course in multiple places to keep water off it. It holds up really well under kind of all conditions. And we're proud of it. We're looking forward to hopefully, showing it off to the rest of the NCAA cross country world in the near future. But, our tennis team was slated to host nationals right now in tennis. And of course they're not hosting, and kind of talking to those coaches about, the disappointment and, all the preparation they put into hosting over the last, several years to just be kind of ripped away like that. It sucks. So yeah. We hope we get to host, but nothing's a given right now. And I don't know what the odds are.
Well, interesting with cross country because there's a lot of questions on obviously what is to come in the next few months, but there's also a lot of questions on what's to come in the next few years. And, there's been a lot of discussions over the years, and probably every year you as a coach know what the coaches conventions are like. And there's always, a lot of agendas around how do we change the system, make it better, or the current system isn't good enough, and all those things, right? And so different opinions from different people. But cross country has been most recently the one to go through that really a deeper discussion on the format of how you get to the NCAA championships, what that looks like. And I know recently there was some committee meeting minutes published about now some of that coming to light, what that could potentially look like. So it sounds like 2022, the landscape and kind of the cross country as we know it could take a significant shift in how it works. Can you kind of shed some light on to what that proposal is that's on the table right now?
Yeah, I don't know if there's necessarily a proposal. I know there's bits and pieces and concepts. I think that the NCAA committee has been tasked with developing a different system for the qualifying process to the national championships. And I'm fairly confident it did not start at the committee level. I think this has come from other avenues and been mandated to them that you need to change, and there's certain parameters you need to fill. And from what I understand and what I've been told, that those parameters are there needs to be a lot fewer teams participating in the regional championships. There needs to be a qualifying process to the regional championships. There needs to be fewer regions, and conference champions need to be automatic qualifiers. I think those are the parameters that the committee has been tasked with. And I think by a lot fewer teams, they want cross country to have a similar percentage of our participating schools represented at the regional championships as other sports. If you look at other sports, that's anywhere from 15 to 21, 22, 23% of your teams. And if you take 20% as a nice round number, that would be, about 64 women's teams and about 58 to 60 men's teams. I doubt there'll be different numbers for the two genders. So I think that's probably the low end. I think, from discussions I've had with people more familiar with the situation, 80 teams might be the high end of the number of teams that actually participate in a regional championship. And if you do the math, I think that the concept that has been discussed most recently is a 5-region format, which would put 16 teams per region if you go to 80, or 11 or 12 if you're at 60, or and more in that range. That's a pretty different looking meet than our current regional system. So yeah, we're talking about radical changes, and I think my opinion is that it's going to be very, very difficult to select teams for that regional, just based on the fact that we have so few data points and dates of competition in cross country. And if you are going to select conference champions, there's 32 conference champions, and now you need between 32 and 48 more teams. How do you tease out the next 270 or 80 teams down to, let's say, 48, when most of them have not seen each other in a competition? I think that's really difficult. And I don't know. I think we're in this situation because I feel like a lot of cross-country coaches have this idea that there is an absolute order of things, and that 1 through 300, there is a universal truth to who is 100, who is 25, and who is 55, and so on. And when we, using the current system, get to the end of the year and a couple teams get in and some feel that a couple others should have been there, or vice versa, we get hung up on a couple of teams that maybe were in the top 30 that didn't get included, and a couple of teams that may have been outside the top 35 in this absolute order that were included. I don't think there is an absolute order, and I think we get too focused on trying to elucidate that absolute truth in order, and we're kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I think our current system, since we've gone to the push rule, I don't believe there's ever been a team that at the end of the year that was truly a top 10, 15, 20, maybe even a top 25 team that was excluded from the championships. I think the strength of our current system is that the most important thing you do to get to the national championships is perform on the day of the regional championship. It doesn't matter how many points you have. If you don't perform at the region, your points don't do anything for you. So, I don't know, some people say I'm old school or opposed to change or afraid of change, and I'm not sure that's true. If we are going to change something, I want to know what it is, what the problem is we're addressing, and how we are doing fixes it without causing additional problems that might be worse than we're already dealing with. So I look at cross country around the world at levels from junior high to high school to world cross, and everywhere it's run, we run it with a so-called open first round. I think it's really hard to get away from that because of the fact that we can't have 29 or 30 or 35 dates of competition to kind of sort out an order to determine who gets to go to the tournament and who doesn't. Anyway, that's my editorial. I understand that many coaches don't feel the way I feel, and I understand that, respect that. From my perspective, we've got a really good system that we have decided, or someone has decided we need to change, without really, in my mind, an idea of why we're changing it or what we're going to, other than we want to look more like other sports, which that phrase drives me insane.
Yeah, Dave, you mentioned that, it's coming from, these decisions are coming from a different avenue, and it's almost like, okay, I'd like for us to set the table. They are proposing this change because A, they're trying to fix a problem, or B, it just seems cleaner from a NCAA sport perspective. And you mentioned the 20% rule. Like, I guess, why do they think that's so effective? Where's the insight coming from that is the way to go with all sports? What is that avenue that's coming down and saying this is why we should fix this, and this is the problem we are fixing, and this is why it's going to make it better?
From my perspective, there's a fallacy in the logic. I think what's being said is other sports limit their tournament fields. other sports cut down to a certain number. Therefore, we should fit in that. And they say these sports limit their fields. I don't believe that. I think their fields are limited by the nature of their competition. You can only play so many basketball games in a 3 or 4 week period. Therefore, you can't, extending the tournament to bigger fields means more time or class time for student athletes. I think it becomes very difficult. In football, I think there's a lot of people out there would love to see the football playoff system expanded to 8, 16, 32 teams. The problem is the wear and tear on the student athletes, the time away from class, and the time it would take additionally to add those extra layers of competition. Cross country lends itself to competing every single kid in the NCAA on the same day at basically the same time and sorting it all out in 30 minutes. I think we are not limited. We are unlimited because we can be. I think many sports wish they could be. I think there's always talk of expanding field sizes from associations that govern other sports. Again, the problem usually comes to there's not enough time, facility, whatever resource to expand the field. So we have to be limited. So I think we've gone from a point of these fields and other tournaments are limited due to logistical constraints to it was chosen to be limited because we're trying to make it, I don't know, elitist or exclusionary. I don't think that's the way it happened. And now we're taking cross country, which does fit nicely into allowing all teams to compete, to we need to look like other sports. Cross country is not like other sports. The athletes that participated in it have demands that are dissimilar from other sports. Every single cross country athlete that starts a competition is required to finish it to have a result. There's no substitution. There's no timeouts. It's typically a maximal effort. And so it's not like other sports where I can manage my athletes' minutes early in the season and then change them later to increase their minutes as the season goes along. In cross country, every time you compete, it's 100%. It's every single minute of the event. I don't know. I think trying to say cross country needs to look like other sports doesn't make sense to me. I mean, unless we're going to give us a ball and timeouts and substitutions and things like that.
So Dave, I guess it sounds like if there was a problem that someone was looking to fix with this, I guess the problem sounds like it would be consistency across, there's a problem with lack of consistency across, how the championships run throughout the NCAA. And if that's the case, is there any context that you are aware of that I'm sure that rules and those decisions for the other sports were made at some point? Do we know where that started from, even for other sports, whether it was a 20% or, was there any reasoning behind that that led that structure down to the path we are today?
I'm not fully abreast of all their sports, but I don't know of offhand any sports that have started with a larger national tournament and decided to refine it and shrink it of the coach's volition, of the coaches association or whoever conducts that sport, saying we need to be smaller. I think typically what I'm more familiar with is coaches and their associations approaching the NCAA about field expansion and trying to get larger. So there may be cases, I don't know them offhand. I think it seems to be more common for sports to look to expand their fields, not contract them. Again, I could be wrong. There could be examples out there that are the opposite, but as far as I know. Going back to your question about what's the point, I think some feel that our current system doesn't do an adequate job of determining or selecting the best teams. Again, as I said, I kind of disagree with that. I feel like for the most part, we get 25 of the top 30 teams in the national championships every year. I think in any sport, under any selection criteria, you are going to have arguments about the last few teams in, the first few teams out. I just don't think that goes away no matter what you do. And we have to accept that. So that's one reason to look for a different system, is to find a more fair or equitable way of granting access to championships. Another concern is I think that can shape these things is student athlete welfare and student athlete experience. Some would say that student athletes would feel better. I've heard this said, student athletes would feel better about participation in regionals if they had to qualify. Maybe that's true. Maybe that's not. I don't think we've ever polled the student athletes to ask them. I think it's a speculation, and it's probably not worth discussing. Some would say, I think that I've heard these two categories put together so many times from my coaching colleagues who view this differently than me, that we need to be more relevant on our campus, and this makes us more relevant as a sport if we have to qualify to our regional championships. I don't know that that's true. I just have a problem with that premise. And the other one, I think, is that we need to look like other sports and their tournaments. And I've heard that batted around a lot too. I don't know why that is. I don't think that there's much about cross country that looks like other sports. It's a unique sport, and the way we conduct it and the way it's conducted all over the world is very similar. So I don't know. I don't know what the reason behind this particular iteration of changes to the regional system are. We've had several runs through this at the Coaches Association level over the last 10 years, where we've had different proposals that have been hotly debated, discussed, voted on, rejected every time, sometimes closer than others. Some have been, pretty heavily rejected. The most recent one was much closer to a 50-50 vote, but still rejected. I think these ideas have been run through the NCAA committee without going through the Coaches Association at times. I think the committee has been directed by the hierarchy of the NCAA to look into these things at times, and they've kind of always come back to the same conclusion that I think we've come to over the last 30 or 40 years, that the system we have is very efficient, it's elegant, it's clean, it grants equal access. Every single team across the country on that second weekend in November has an opportunity to make a championship, and they have equal access. Be top two in your region and you're in. So I don't know what the current motivation is or what problem we're trying to solve. I would like to ask whoever is driving that question, but I don't know who's driving it.
So I want to get into some specifics, Dave. I mean, we got and specifics that at least are out there that you've heard, because I haven't seen anything officially published at this point other than the minutes. It sounds like potentially five regions from what you said, 80 teams, which if you do the math could be roughly 16 teams per region. But how, what else about it? Like, how do you get there? How is that? How are the teams chosen outside of the qualifiers through conference championships? Like, what do teams have to do to get to this new proposed system?
Yeah, and just to touch on first, my idea that goes beyond what you already knew, what you read, is just from informal discussions with people in and around the committee or people who spoke to the committee. So, I don't want to go out there and sound an alarm and say, this is what they're doing, this is what it is, because I don't know that. I'm not on the committee, I'm not in the room. What they discussed tomorrow might be different the next day. I don't know where they are at this point. I don't know if the numbers I'm quoting you are exact or are a current working model. I just know that I've been told there's those kinds of discussions. So I think it's in those ballparks, but I don't know because, again, I am not on a committee, and I've had informal discussions with some people around the committee, but again, I haven't been in the meetings. I think your question is a good one. Is how do you select and how do you tease out the top after you take out the at-large qualifier or the automatic qualifiers, which would be if you took conference champions, which I've been told that's a necessary part of this new system. That's 32 teams. So if we're going to say we're going to have 80, that leaves 48 at-large selections. And how do you tease out those 48 from the rest of the 200 or 250 that also participated in cross country? And, I don't know how you do that. People have used the term RPI or something like an RPI, but an RPI is only accurate and valid if there is the more points of information, the more dates of competition you have, the more accurate or valid that kind of system can become. I think in cross country, the problem is, as of right now, we have two, in general, I think most institutions compete in 2 to 4 competitions prior to their conference meet. I don't think that's enough to make an RPI statistically valid. Some would say that in a cross country championship, a cross country meet, you can race 40 teams at once. The problem for me is that one bad day in that situation, a guy gets sick, a guy gets knocked down, he's hurt, he can't run because he's got a class conflict that doesn't allow him to travel that weekend. One bad day counts 40 times against you, and it's almost impossible to make up for that in the other 2 or 3 you might have. It's not, again, if you had 40 dates of competition where you ran against 40 different teams on different days, that's a much different scenario. Then one bad day can blend into the rest of the information you have and paint a more accurate picture. But saying, well, I ran against 40 teams on this day, well, a really, really good day skews you to look like a much better team than you are if something goes exceptionally well. And I think more problematic, a bad day, which is much easier to come by for whatever reason. A cross-country score can be dramatically changed by just one guy in your top 5 not finishing or having a bad day or something going wrong. I think it really unfairly skews your RPI to a lower ranking, and it's almost impossible to recoup that. That's why I don't like the RPI scenario. To me, and again, this is my personal opinion, if we're going to do this, I would think those 48 teams should be selected by committee. And that puts the committee in a really tough spot. They've got to go then and justify their selections like all these other committees that select fields for NCAA tournaments do. And they're going to take some heat, and they're going to take some pressure, and they're going to take some criticism. And I don't envy that job, but to me, having the eyeball test, being able to analyze different bits of information, whether it be an RPI or a strength of schedule or individuals on the team, what they've done in the past and who may or may not have run but is now running, I think that takes the eyeball test, and it takes human interaction to kind of compile and then set an order and select teams.
Dave, I'm curious, given the amount of different types of schools and different programs in the NCAA, especially in D1 cross country, can you give us a situation for a team that might unfairly benefit from this new proposed system, and then a team that might be unfairly punished in this current climate?
Well, I think if you're going to use conference champions, the conference champion of a less powerful conference is going to get the same weight as a team who wins a extremely powerful conference, and they get the same entry into the championship. And I think in that respect, you could argue that team from a weaker conference who is a conference champion might be unfairly advantaged or given an opportunity that maybe doesn't make sense in the grand scheme of things. On the other hand, there are some conferences that might include on any given year 6 teams that end up finishing top 15 or top 20 in the NCAA finals. It's clear to me, or at least in my opinion, that you might only get 3 or 4 of those teams through to the regional to then compete for a chance to the national. Again, maybe that's just sport and the way it is. I think you can look at the NFL, and I talked to you guys about this yesterday, and if you look this year at Dallas and Philadelphia battling out for an 8-8 record to see who's going to go out of their division to the playoffs, and then you've got the NFC West with Seattle and San Francisco at 12-4 or 13-3, whatever they are, and you're thinking, man, how is that fair? Well, life isn't always fair. So maybe this is just something we live at, that we say, okay, like other sports and other times, that yes, this team that won this region might not have finished top 10, won this conference might not finish top 10 in this conference, but they go, and the team that finished 5th in this conference does not. Sometimes that's just sport.
Does that happen at I'm trying to think of how this plays out at the new proposed regional space, and Dave, in the conversations that you've had, how are those 5 potential regions broken up? I mean, is it geographically based? If there's an RPI, is it like an NCAA basketball tournament where the regions are tried to split evenly based on ranking? What does that look like?
I think they're still working on that. I don't know. Again, I'm not privy to their conversations, but I haven't heard anything to say they've got, these are the regions, this is what they'll look like. I don't know that. Maybe they do. I think the difficult thing about the second part of that, having a seeded locational regional where these are the regions and we'll place teams in them in order to make them evenly distributed. The hard part of that is most of us coach two genders. And I might have the number one ranked team on the men's side and the number two on the women's side. So my number one men's team should be paired with the number 5 and number 6 best men's team in a seeded regional, whereas my number 2 women's team should be with the number, I guess it'd be 4 and whatever comes next, 7. But it would mean either splitting our teams and having our coaches split up and go with them to separate regionals, or saying, no, your teams, both genders, will go to the same region. And then again, you're going to create unbalanced regions based on the fact that now you're upsetting the seeding by saying, we're going to take this number 2 team and put it with the number 1 team in the same region because their men's team are also number 1. And who do you disadvantage, the men or the women? And I don't know. I think that's difficult. The other problem, I think, with that scenario is we wouldn't know where we were competing until the day after the last conference championship finished. And then we've got, under the current calendar, 8 or 9 days till we got to get on a plane and go somewhere. And getting a plane, getting buses, getting hotels for a location 8 days in advance, I think would be really tricky. It works in other sports because the NCAA pays for it. And they've got the hotel set up. And it's a block of rooms that then they put teams into. And they're doing the travel and their airline tickets. But as far as I'm aware, the NCAA is absolutely not going to pay for or manage the travel for this new regional or the first round, whatever they're going to call it. In that case, it's up to the schools to figure it out. And what do? Go make hotel reservations at 5 locations? Are they going to let me out of my hotels if I don't come to their location? Because I'm not going to know my regional until, if you do a seeded system, you're not going to know your regional till the seeding's already done. So I think that kind of system probably is a non-starter. I think it'd be really hard. Have a huge financial impact. Travel would be difficult. I just don't see how you can do a seeded regional in cross country unless the NCAA is going to pay for
it. Yeah, that was a follow-up. I was wondering is, given, the pandemic we're going through now and already the talks of budgets and budget cuts that are already taking place, how much will that weigh into any decision around changes, and talking about making teams go maybe outside of what their region is typically, where maybe it is a bus ride, now it's a flight, but you don't, so I guess in short, how much will the budget conversation guide these kind of decisions?
I think ultimately it'll be a big factor. I think right now, maybe that's not been part of the task to reduce budgets, but anytime you are going to, if we're going to create this system to get from the conference meet to the regional meet that involves competitions prior to the conference meet, it's going to incentivize more competition and more travel outside of your locality. And I think, again, in terms of equity, the West, the Southwest, the Mountain, those areas have very, very few schools clustered together. As you go further east, you get to the Northeast and the Southeast, there are a lot more universities and a lot tighter radius where, access to an RPI or points or however you're going to do it, access to more diverse competition is uneven. So, that would require then travel and unduly burden teams from rural areas or areas where universities are more spread out to take on the expense of traveling to build a resume that would get them then into the regional meet. So I think that while probably most ADs aren't necessarily, especially now, paying attention to what might be happening in these discussions, I think when you come to them and say, hey, I need to get to the national championships, but to do so, I need to give my student athletes, every advantage I can to get them the opportunity to go. We're going to have to travel, not 3 times this year before the conference championships. We're going to have to travel 7 or 8. And we're not getting on a plane once, we're getting on 3 or 4 because we've got to build our, whatever you want to call it, our resume, our RPI, our points, whatever we're going to do, we're going to have to do that. And I think at that point, there might be some athletic directors look around and go, we told you to think locally, regionally. Let's get more drawn in, not more spread out. And I think at that point, I think there might be some reaction that would be less favorable than, when you start looking at the cost of what this might be. I think it's going to be, at least in my mind, frowned on by ADs who are trying to reduce those costs.
Yeah, Dave, I'd love to piggyback on this. It's like there's no direct line to this saving money. It could cost more money. Given the current circumstance and the amount of time that this has been teased out, why now? Why is this decision coming to the plate right now in 2020?
It's an excellent question. And again, I would love to ask whomever it is, organization, group, committee, individual, who really wants this and is driving it. I would love to have that conversation and say, again, what is the problem we're trying to solve? Well, how does this solve the problem? And are you sure this doesn't create more problems in terms of equal access to championships, student athlete welfare, missed class time away from campus, increased risk to whatever virus might be out there, and the budget impact to the universities trying to support these student athletes and give them every opportunity? I would love to ask that question. I don't know who to ask it to right now. So I don't know. Again, I have no idea where this is coming from or how it's, other than I just saw, like you guys saw, I saw the report and I've asked and I've been told by people that, it didn't initiate at the committee level. That's all I know.
So for you, Dave, and other coaches you've talked to, what are the biggest outstanding questions that need to be answered?
I think most coaches, the typical, what I'm hearing most is if we're being told this is going to happen, and it's going to happen for sure, it needs to be mitigated. We need to make sure that whatever system is imposed upon us, because this wasn't voted on or decided by the coaches, we need to make sure it is as fair, as equitable, as has as little budget impact as possible. And we need to have some input on what those final details might look like. I don't know that we're going to get that opportunity. I have no idea, again, what the timeline on this is now. I don't know if they're trying to get this done by the end of the year, but if you're going to implement it in 2022, you got to start selecting sites. You've got to tell sites who might be awarded. They're about to award championship sites for the regional and national championships. This summer, they're going to award the next 4 years, 2022, 23, 24, and 25. So in my mind, it would probably be better to have this sorted before you award championship locations and start retracting them than to award them, have people spend money to developing courses, do whatever they need to start preparing for 2022, only to be told, hey, turns out we're not coming, we're going to do something different. So to me, if they're going to implement it, and I don't necessarily, reading that release, I wasn't sure. I was under my impression it would be at the earliest 2022. I didn't read it as it's definitely going to happen in 2022. I think that seems like a really tight time frame given the other circumstances. I think my coaching colleagues that I've spoken to a lot of them feel like at the end of the day, give me the system, let me know how it works, and let me try to figure it out. I think there's going to be some, curiosity and maybe anxiety over what system we're going to use. How are we going to select those at-large teams? And what do I need to do to structure my seasons and the athletes I'm recruiting? How do I structure my team to give myself the best chance to qualify? If we're going to have a three-point line in basketball, let me know so I can recruit some three-point shooters. If we're going to get rid of it, let me know and I won't recruit those guys, So I think if I need guys that are grinders that can run 7 or 8 or 9 races a year and stay fairly consistent, but maybe necessarily aren't the superstars, then I need to do that and have those guys in my lineup. If I need to get more depth so I can, again, manage minutes and give some guys days off early in the season so that I have them for later season, I need to know that. I need to start spreading my scholarships a different way. And I would hope that whatever changes we're going to make, we're going to have ample time to adjust our rosters and our travel plans to accommodate the new system.
You said that the coaches or the committee, isn't necessarily making this decision. So I'm curious, is that normally the case when these kind of changes are made, or is the committee usually involved in in that decision and those initiatives that are pushed out?
From my experience, it's both. When I was in the committee, there were some things that came to us, a lot of things that came to us from the Coaches Association and said, hey, this is what we want to do. We talked about it at our convention. This is our vote. And it's pretty clear that this is something the coaches want. And in general, when I was there, the committee was very receptive to those kinds of suggestions, recommendations, requests. Sometimes it comes from a conference or an individual, an individual institution that might have some ideas. The job of the committee is to oversee, administer, regulate the national championships and the qualifying procedures to them. That's kind of their job. That's what they do. I think some things come internally. The committee gets together and they start, analyzing the past championship, what went well, what didn't go well, where do we think there could be some minor changes. If we have some major changes that we think we should make, typically what I experienced was Jeff Malinsky at the NCAA would then reach out to the Coaches Association and say, hey, here's some things we saw that we think could be improved. Please run this through your Coaches Association and give us feedback. I think the committee is, they're a group of NCAA people, right? They're coaches, administrators, and conference personnel that are in athletic departments or working with them. So, the committee is us. There is a small group of people that represent us, and they are tasked with, overseeing those championships. Not everything they do gets run through the coaches. There's minor changes that are made all the time. Scheduling changes, what time the long jump's going to go versus the triple jump. Those things are, sent out to 300 coaches to say, do you approve? I mean, the committee would never get anything done. So a lot of what they do in what they see as the best interest of the sport in conducting the championships, and it comes internally. I think then, like I said, there's external factors that the committee is also in partnership or in collaboration with the Coaches Association. They have oversight, the Championship Oversight Committee. There is Playing and Practice Season Committee that will also have input. There's individuals and a hierarchy and a structure at the NCAA that different individuals have, purview over different sports and manage, people who manage the sport. So information, ideas, concepts, directions the committee might go come from a lot of avenues, and it's their job to kind of filter through it and do what they see as best to conduct the sport.
Dave, just to close on this potential rule change, how do we know what is the final say here? How do we know if this is going to happen? When will we know? Because like you alluded to, championship sites are going to be awarded soon. So it sounds like a decision on this is going to have to be made relatively soon. How do we continue to track this, and when will a decision finally be made?
I mean, I think like you're thinking, I think that it would be much easier to, if there's going to be a change to make it and then award sites. But I don't think it has to be that way. It's more complicated. It's inconvenient if you say, here's our 9 regional sites for 2022, and then you come back in the winter 2021 and say, no, we're changing the system. We're going to get rid of these. It can be done. It's, it's not probably ideal, but so I don't think there's necessarily, an hourglass running out. I think hopefully whatever the committee and the championship oversight committee will have to approve anything the committee comes up with. Whatever they decide, hopefully it's not rushed or pressured through, that there's thought put into it. It's analyzed pretty carefully, and that it is under whatever constraints they are to do something, under whatever parameters they're limited by. Hopefully it's the best possible scenario under whatever parameters are being, mandated. So I don't know if 2022, that date was in there, but again, and I'm not looking at the piece right now, but I thought I interpreted or read it as the earliest this might be implemented would be 2022. I didn't necessarily think it said it would be implemented in 2022.
And what will the final vote look like on something like this? And will it be a vote?
I think no, not necessarily. I don't think there's necessarily a vote. I think as far as I understand it, and from my experience on the committee's been charged with a task, and that is to come up with a system that has these parameters we've already discussed, and come up with a system that maximizes student athlete experience, minimizes financial impact, but fits within these parameters, and you determine how we do it. And they will come up with what they've been charged to do, and they're very bright people. They're like I said, there's some great minds on that committee. They'll come up with the best possible system that fits those parameters. Now, I think those parameters, to me, really limit how good a possible system could be, but that's my personal opinion. They'll do their best. They'll come up with a system, and then I don't know exactly. I think it then will be sent upstairs to the Championship Oversight Committee, which is a bigger committee that kind of oversees all championships, and they will approve or reject or tweak or send back whatever the sport committee suggests or comes up with. That's my understanding of it. And again, I don't know who exactly or what the driving force or entity behind this is right now. I think you would have to ask the sport committee for their opinion on that, and I'm not going to speculate on who's telling them or where it's coming from.
Well, we've done a lot of talk on potentially what happens in 2022 or beyond. I'm also curious about this year. We're in the midst of unprecedented times. Budgets are getting cut. In some cases, programs are getting cut. So I guess for the sake of our discussion, we'll assume cross country happens this fall. We assume fall sports come back. I'm curious, from your perspective as a coach, what does the season look like, and how is the season impacted? And are there any changes, or are we back to just business as usual?
I don't think we're business as usual by any stretch of the imagination. I think it starts with the federal government and what their recommendations are. If the recommendation is there should be no leisure travel, or you should not be getting on planes unless absolutely necessary, I think it's going to be hard for any institution to look at that recommendation and say, this is mandatory, necessary, whatever critical, we have to get on the plane and go to Stillwater, Oklahoma to run a cross country race. I don't know if that's, I think it'd be hard for most ADs to kind of ignore the recommendation, or not to ignore it, but to deem their cross-country travel as critical. So it starts at the federal government, and then state governments and local governments, and what their policies and recommendations are going to be. And then universities, what are they recommending for their staff and their students. And then once you get all of that cleared up, then you can say, now, as an athletic department, knowing that we've got kind of clearance from all these other entities, what do we see as safe for our student athletes, and what are we willing to do? What are we willing to allow them to do? I think that's going to be on a institution by institution or conference by conference basis. Then you have the financial side of it, right? And I think a lot of institutions are going to be looking at greatly reduced budgets this year, and how many institutions or conferences are going to mandate to their cross-country teams, we don't want you getting on a plane and traveling, number one, for health and safety, number two, for cost. And if that happens, I don't know what the season looks like. I know what my season looks like, because I was going to be here in Stillwater the entire year anyway. We're hosting a meet on September 1st, the Jamboree on the 26th, and pre-nationals on the 17th. So that hasn't changed for me. We're still going to do that. Who shows up to run against us? I don't know. Will we get an opportunity to get at large points? I don't know. It depends on who shows up, because we're not traveling. I know that I've already turned in a travel budget for cross country, or proposed travel budget that I've gone over with my business manager, that has $0 for cross country travel. And that's they're not going to adjust it up probably. So I'm going to stay at $0. So no matter who decides to come here, we're running 3 races here. It might just be us.
And so is that, I mean, as you look at that, I'm trying to understand how that affects, like, what's the real world effect of the current system if teams are not able to travel?
Yeah, right now we have a system, and that is the system for choosing automatic and at-large qualifiers for this year. And there is no immediate plan that I'm aware of to change it. There's I'm not aware of any discussion to change it, that is the plan going forward. And at some point, you pass a date where no matter what happens, we're not changing that. If we have cross country, that is the plan, right? At some point, you can't change the rules mid-year on teams that are buying tickets, if they are buying plane tickets or sitting in hotels or setting up their schedules, and say, hey, we're going to play by a different set of rules now. So at some point very soon, the system we have is the system we have. I think there might be a limited opportunity, if there was will to do it, to change it. And I think about, again, our current system and the access to at-large points. If there are enough universities that have limited travel, becomes inequitable for teams in the Southwest, the West, and the mountain regions, because their access to other teams to potentially score points against goes down significantly. I think teams in the East, Northeast, Southeast maybe have a little more access. Maybe the upper Midwest has a little more in terms of density of schools and density of schools that might be point providers. So I don't know. I don't have any idea whether the NCAA will be willing to say, hey, we're going to do a different system this year or not. I have no idea if they'll respond that way. I think probably the tendency would be to not change anything. I think that's where they're going to start from, and it would take something significant or major to convince anybody to want to change the system that we have in place right now. So my best guess is, if there is a season, it'll run exactly as it is now. I think it will be interesting to see the ultimate distribution of those at-large points and the teams that get in from them. It might be skewed one way or another. But like I said, I think we start to run up against a clock when you can change that. And I don't know if the will or the urgency is there to do anything like that right now. I haven't heard a lot of talk other than amongst coaches who are saying, hey, if that happens, it's not going to be fair. And that's kind of the discussion I've heard.
Dave, I'd like to play out a scenario. I mean, we've heard some talk about, non-essential travel would be non-championship events. So given in that sense of a definition, is there a scenario where cross country is just conference, regionals, and nationals? And if so, what would that national, what sort of NCAA are we looking at if we only have 2 meets to siphon down all these schools?
I think in that case, you got 2 options. One is it's a straight number, 3 from every region, 4 from every region, whatever it is. And yes, some regions are unequal, but again, like the NFC Central, that's life, right? Sometimes that's the way it goes. So that's one scenario. The other scenario is you take your top 2 from region, and then a committee selects the next 13 teams. And that's not unusual. It happens in other sports. And I think almost all the other sports that have a selection, there's a committee selecting them. Now, those committees have tools at their disposal, like RPIs or strengths of schedules or win-loss records that can help them, again, tease out the ranking of teams that get in. I think under the scenario you described, it'd be tough. You're going to have basically the conference meet and the regional meet to try to figure out who goes and who doesn't. I think it'd be tough. And not trying to play the mind of the NCAA, but it would seem to me the more likely scenario would be, we're just going to say it's a straight number. It's 3 or 4 or 2, not 2 would be 2, 3 or 4 per region, and that's it. I don't know if that's true, but if it was me making the decision, not because I'm in a region that might benefit from that or be hurt by that. I just think it's the cleanest, easiest, with limited information. It gets you to where you want to be easiest. And again, it probably guarantees you're getting, 25 of the, or you're getting 20 of the top 25 teams in there. You might lose a couple. You might lose the 5th or 6th or 7th best team. Easily could see that.
I'm curious if you think this, and again, I'm thinking from the mindset of, teams aren't able to travel as normal. Really that affects the kind of the super meets we've seen, right? The pre-nats of the world, the Wisco, Nutty Cone meets of the world. Does this affect top teams at all, or is it more the at-large teams that are kind of on the bubble? And then kind of a second piece of that is there any regions specifically that you think are negatively affected more so than others?
By a straight number?
No, sorry. I'm saying with our current system, with potential
Yeah.
travel restrictions for teams to get at-large points.
Yeah, I think any team in the West, the Southwest, the Mountain region, the kind of Central Midwest, the density of teams to run against. If for example, a conference or an AD was to say, you can travel to any competition with a 300-mile radius. Well, if we did that at my school, I think there's 6 or 7 Division I's I could get to. If you did that in, let's say, Columbus, Ohio, it's a much bigger number. The number of teams you could compete against, or if you were in, I don't know, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, there's a much bigger number of schools you can get to. So, the Mountain region has recently been very strong, as has the West. But even to get to see each other, there is a huge gap. You could say, well, the Mountain region's fine because they can race against each other and get points. Well, the problem is they're spread out from Texas to upper northern Utah, and UTEP to Utah is a long, long way to go, and they're not going to see each other. Same with the West. I think the West has been very strong over the last 5 or 10 years, whatever it is. And again, from Seattle to Tempe is a long way to go, and you're not going to be able to see them even though you're in the same region. So the number of schools you could potentially see within a given radius, if those become kind of limiting factors, that's where the inequity would come in our current system. And teams have a lot of teams to get to are going to be disadvantaged compared to those who can drive to many schools in a small radius.
I've heard, in our current system with no travel restrictions, I know there's teams out there that are very methodical in how they approach their season, where they can accumulate their points and put themselves in the best position to get to the nationals, right? And so what could you potentially see happening in this scenario? Like what, for lack of a better phrase, like how could teams potentially game the system here?
There are definitely ways to game the system, and there are currently ways to game the system, and it's not done. At least I haven't seen it happen. I've thought this through, and I thought there are ways to do this. I think most of my colleagues who are cross-country coaches are pretty ethical people, and I don't. It hasn't happened. The scenario where I don't want to go into it, but there's scenarios where you could rig this, and it hasn't happened yet that I've seen, and I would hope it wouldn't happen under any circumstance. But if teams A, B, C, and D want to have races against each other 3 or 4 times a week and have a different order of finish every week, well, then by the end you're going to have accumulated points against each other, and if one of you gets in, the others get points. And it's, you never want to anticipate or think that anybody would, I think this is kind of stupid to talk about, because I don't think there's coaches out there that would do those types of things, like deliberately lose a race to grant possible points to somebody else and trade off, I think, so is there conceivable ways to game the system? Of course there is. But it hasn't happened. That already exists, and it hasn't happened. And I don't think, the coaches in the NCAA think that way or behave that way.
Yeah, and again, this is kind of like there's so many unknowns, right? It's a worst case scenario. If there's a team that literally cannot go anywhere other than seeing one school, like what are you left to think in terms of how you put yourself in position to get there, right? And so. Like you said, you hope it wouldn't go down that road, but
yeah. Well, I think of a good example of a team that's really good that sometimes got in at large, sometimes automatically, is New Mexico, and they have a great program. They do a great job, but they are pretty remote. And I don't know how many Division I schools are within a 300-mile radius of them, but it's not more than 5. It's a pretty small number. And how many of them consistently qualify for the national championships that a school like New Mexico might go compete against and have the opportunity to score points? It's not a lot, and I think not to call anybody, I'm not calling him out. I'm just saying for the New Mexico program and Coach Franklin, I think that would present if it was me, I would feel extremely disadvantaged in that situation. If I was told I can only travel X far, I can't get to any, viable points, and yet I'm competing against people who are racking up dozens of points on the weekends. I would feel like it was a really inequitable situation. And, the full disclosure, I think I'm kind of in the same boat here, is that, again, we don't have we have 6 or 7 schools we can get to in 4 hours. And after that, it's pretty tough. And I'm lucky that if we have a season this year, the national championships is here. And I think that will drive some teams here that might not otherwise come. So we are probably going to see more than our normal share of teams coming through and competing on our course. So we'll have opportunity to race other teams and possibly accumulate points if we were to need them.
And just to clarify, you're saying 300 miles, Dave. Is that like a number you've heard thrown around as like a possible limit if there is a restriction, or is that just a hypothetical?
It's just a hypothetical. I think you can go 400, but what's the limit of driving you can do in a day safely? That's kind of where I think it gets to, is if I'm an AD and I'm looking at it thinking, my cross-country team's going to load up some vans and drive, what do I feel comfortable saying? You're going to drive this far and then stop, spend the night, race, be out the course for 4 or 5 hours, get in a car and drive back. What do I feel safe in feeling like that's a range? And I think whether it's 200, 300, 400, at some point there's a limit where I think beyond that, I don't think it's safe. You're going to be driving, 14, 15 hours in a 24-hour window. I don't think that's a great idea when you're driving around somebody's most prized possession, someone's children in that van or in that car with you. And I don't want you driving more than that.
Makes sense.
Dave, I'm curious. We've tossed around a lot of hypotheticals over the last hour or so. I'm curious, for your specific team, for your school, the Big 12 in Oklahoma State, what's the data point or the indicator that you're leaning on or waiting for from an AD to say this year will be normal or this year will not be normal? Like, what, we're kind of in the gray area, but what's that kind of tipping point that you better be ready for a completely different season?
I think there's stages. I think the first thing is having students back on campus. I think in my mind, you cannot have athletics if your students are on our campus. If you're saying it's too unsafe for your students to come back, these are students, right? They're athletes, but they're students. I just, in my mind, I don't see how you get over that dichotomy of saying we're not going to have students, but we're going to have athletics. So that's the first thing. I think the next thing to making a normal year is does the elephant in the room, does football play? And do they have a semi or as close to as a regular schedule as possible? And, let's not ignore the fact of the matter that the football season produces the revenue that drives most of this for most of us. Not everybody, but for certainly the Power Five, the football season produces the revenue that kind of funds the rest of us. And so if we're going to have a normal season where we have normal travel and normal those things, after health and safety, which is number one, second is what's the budget look like? And that's highly dependent on what does football do, what does basketball do? And, I think, my AD has been using an analogy that was also used by our team physician that I kind of agree with. And it's that, as we started this, we went down a ladder, down a staircase into the bottom where we got. And when we come out of this, we're going to go back up that ladder. And the first step we went down was the cancellation of athletics and collegiate athletics. So probably the last step we come up is the reinstatement of normal college athletics. So probably in my mind, I think a lot of things have to happen still that I'm not sure we're going to get to. I mean, I'm hoping and planning and preparing for a normal season. And sometimes I've got myself convinced that we can get there. And other days I wake up and go, there's no way. How do we do this? So again, I think it comes from, policies and recommendations and guidelines from government authorities first, and then from your institution. How are they treating the academic year? And then to your athletic department, how are they going to treat, sports in the fall or the spring? And, I think it's a multi-level, there's not one thing, there's a multi-level step. And the first thing, we've announced we're going to have students on campus in the fall. And again, that's set in stone until it isn't, right? And right now, that's what we're planning to do. And we're all around here preparing like we're going to have students, but is that what's going to happen? Who knows? Things change fast in this scenario.
It's crazy to think about, like, talking through these scenarios. And this is where it's hard to go down some of these roads, but you think about this year, and if, this fall sports happen, there's probably some effects, as we're talking about, if there is travel restrictions and what that does to the season. There's the other scenario where the season doesn't happen at all. And if that happens and budgets are affected and programs are affected, are there ripple effects that go into 2021? And when you think then, and this is the road, you hate to go down, and knowing there's a change on the horizon potentially in 2022, what's crazy to think about is 2019 might have been the last year of what we know today as NCAA cross country in the current and traditional structure.
And I missed that year. So the last
2018
we were
for
there.
You.
Yeah, it's 2018. Thank you very much. No, the part of me wants to run wild down this negative rabbit hole, and I've done that at times over the period of the last 6 or 8 weeks. And part of me wants to be optimistic and think, no, they're gonna figure this out. We're gonna get there. I think regardless, there's going to be ripple effects in 2023. I don't think, even if we came up with a miracle cure for this virus and an antibody fix, I don't know if the economy recovers to the point where people are super comfortable, buying suites, buying season tickets at the same level they were, or making donations at the same level they were in 2018, 2019. I think it might take time for the economy to recover, for people to start having confidence in their financial situations and have the discretionary income to do the things that support college athletics that they've done in the past. So, I think there's ripple effects definitely for 2021 and probably 22 and maybe 23. And I don't know where that ripple finally evens out to it's smooth again. I think it could be a while.
Dave, we want to thank you for coming on. I mean, these are, changes are tough.
Yeah.
The hypotheticals around what will happen this year are tough. So we really do appreciate you coming on, sharing your thoughts, given, the feedback that that you've been privy to through your relationships with other coaches out there. Hopefully we see you taking the positive Dave Smith outlook now. It sounds like you went bottom of the barrel early on, and now we're on the rise back up. So that's good. Hopefully, obviously from our side, we're hoping we see you this fall on the cross country course, and that new cross country course that you guys put so much work into.
Yeah, I'm optimistic, and I'm excited about things. I think we have a couple of great programs, and I told you guys this yesterday. I feel like I've brought in my deepest class of men I've ever had for cross country athletes. It's hard to argue with German Fernandez and Colby Lowe and Ryan Prentice as a group of three. But this team's probably deeper, and we probably have 5 or 6 guys where our third guy was in that class. We don't have a guy who ran 8:34 for 2 miles, but we got some guys that are really starting to develop here, and one guy in particular who's having a season without a season and running PRs in the mile and the 3,200 and doing big things. So I'm excited. I hope we get to run. I'm optimistic, and like I said, more days than not now, I think things are going to be okay, and we're going to be there. We'll see you in the fall.
Cool. Well, I know you guys are itching to get back there for 2020. So we're wishing you guys all the best, and we'll be talking to you soon, Dave. So thanks again for joining us.
Sounds good. Thanks, guys.
NCAA cross country, Al. It is a lot of things up in the air. I mean, this season specifically, obviously we're all waiting on the decision of NCAA sports in the fall. Will they happen? Will they happen in the way that we traditionally know them to happen? And even if they do, really what's going to come into effect around budgets and travel restrictions, and can teams do what they've been able to do in the past?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot up in the air right now. And again, a lot of this was hypothetical. And it's, we don't want to present doomsday scenarios, but I think it's important, and this is why this podcast exists, is to put all the information out there that we know and make sure everybody's abreast of it. And, we don't think it's necessarily helps the sport if some some notes from a committee hearing just like kind of go by the wayside. Like those will really impact our sport, and that's why we felt like it was important to bring Dave on today. I think this potential presentation of this new regional qualifying could have some serious impacts on seasons, on travel, and even Dave even said, it could affect the way he recruits and the athletes on drastic, kind of different perspective on how even approach a season, which is wild, and it's wild that it could happen as quickly as it might.
Yeah, and I think it's important. These are emotional decisions for coaches, right? And not that they're making them, but they're emotional for them as they're waiting for decisions to be made. And so, I think it is important to keep an open mind. I don't think Dave is alone in his view of saying, "Hey, I don't think this proposed change is the best." Whether he thinks the current structure is the best or whatever it may be. I've got to work with the committees on a number of things, and I've got to see them work, and I know that they are taking the coaches' consideration and the well-being of the programs. I mean, that's really the first priority in everything they're doing, right? And so they may have a directive, and whether that directive is popular or not, what you can be aware of and ensure is that they're going to consider how this impacts coaches and programs. Are you going to get it perfect for everyone? No, and no change ever does that. But I think it's important to call out that the programs and the coaches will be taken into consideration here. I think when we look at what is on the table, there's a little bit that we know, there's a lot we don't know, and the little bit is it's a 5 regional system they're talking about. There is a percentage of NCAA D1 teams that they want to qualify, which and they say want it to look like other sports. As Dave said, that's normally a 20% amount of teams, which could be in that 50 to 60 range. He's heard maybe possibly 80 teams they would expand it to across the 5 regions. And we know part of that will be or potentially be conference qualifiers. You win your conference, you get to regionals, right? And that's been something we've heard for years that they want to figure out how to incorporate. So I'm not surprised to hear that. It's just really how does it affect, I think, Al, you said the biggest question you had to me was how do you get to regionals?
Sure. And I get it. Like winning a championship, like that's this very clean, tangible thing that sports fans can understand, and you should be rewarded for that. We get that. But what we don't understand in this new proposed system is if you don't win your conference, how do you qualify for regionals? And that's a question a lot of coaches have, and they're going to base their whole season around answering that question to make sure that they get that adequate opportunity and then the NCAAs. And I think, Ryan, like about like the core of what makes NCAA great and why it's so peculiar different is, there is a moment at regionals that I loved, being from like a smaller school, like going to regionals and like knowing that, hey, like, in this crazy, we might have a chance to go to NCAAs. It's this perfectly democratized moment where everybody has the same opportunity. No other sport can present that in this just kind of perfect moment where everybody's on the same playing field. And I think taking that away from some of the schools whose crown at the end of the season is to just go to regionals, it really kills some of the soul of cross country. And that's what I get worried about. And I wonder how kind of those mid-tier schools, I wonder how it will affect D2s and D3s and just the overall community identity of cross country. And so I think we need to consider the athletes first and the students first. We need to understand how it's going to affect every kind of program. We need to remember how it's going to affect the identity of our sport. How do we maintain that? Make sure that every decision goes through that lens.
Yeah, it's a different it's a different outlook to your season when you're hey, I have a shot to run at the regional championships, versus saying like, hey, our team's not that great in our conference. My most exciting race of the year might be in September, right? And so it definitely changes that outlook for student athletes when there's already limited number of competitions throughout the cross country season. You're normally competing 4 or 5 times. You take one away, you're not really looking at a season with a ton of substance for some people. So it's definitely interesting. And the last thing that I'll say too is that there's a financial piece to this that we have to be really aware of, and we're in a time that financials right now this year are important, but it's going to be maybe arguably even more important in the years coming out of this. And so how are we setting up a structure and a system that allows teams to travel and be smart with the money when we know universities are going to be coming out of a really tough situation? And I think of, one, how do you qualify for regionals, but are the men's teams and the women's teams qualifying to different regionals? And how do you go from a system that allows teams to get on a bus together and go into a regional competition to now potentially saying, hey, I'm on the East Coast and one team has to go to the Midwest and another has to go to the Southeast, and we have to figure out these logistics, right? So there's a lot to consider here, and there's obviously a lot of work to do to get to the point. So we're going to keep our eye out. We're going to remain beneath the grandstand and find out more of this information as it comes, and not just with this topic, but many others. So until next week, Al, I appreciate you as always coming on, sharing the insight. We're wishing you and your family all the best getting through these times. So until we meet again, my friend.
Appreciate it, guys.